Do you know what happens if you ask a Disney Imagineer to design an entire island? You're about to learn what only a few people in the world truly understand. Back in the early 80s, Disney was the only company in the world creating themed entertainment on a massive scale. Walt Disney himself had a philosophy that he wanted to keep all of their talent in-house. All of it. But to build EPCOT, they needed a virtual army of Imagineers, so they hired about 2,000 of them from across the United States to do the job. One of those Imagineers was a young visionary named Hugh Darley. He helped create the Canada Pavilion at EPCOT, along with England and the American Adventure Pavilions. It was a monumental project and it turned out great. But after EPCOT was built, Disney had a problem, because there were about 2,000 Imagineers now with nothing to do. Some of them stayed with the Disney company, but quite a few of them started companies of their own. And now, for the first time in history, there was a wave of companies bringing Disney-style Imagineering to the rest of the world, including one co-founded by Hugh Darley. And it became one of the most renowned experience design companies in the world. Back then it was called iTech Productions. As Hugh described it, it was the merging of imagination and technology, iTech. And I might be a little biased here, but I used to work there and it was amazing. And recently they were bought out and merged with another company you may have heard of called Thinkwell. Now, Hugh eventually moved on to do even more great things. He co-founded the Themed Entertainment Association, and he was VP at Paramount, where he developed the highly successful Star Trek experience in Las Vegas. And even today, Disney brings it back to give tours of EPCOT and to talk about his experience as an Imagineer. But in the 1990s, Hugh saw an opportunity in an industry that really hadn't been touched, because he realized that despite the success of shows like The Love Boat, the cruise industry still was riddled with problems. At ports of call, cruise guests often found themselves in congested, noisy tourist traps, and destinations themselves suffered from logistical problems that made it difficult for operators. So Hugh Darley saw an opportunity to transform an industry. But what it needed was a man who was able to both cast a creative vision for the cruise industry and also have the gravitas to influence world governments. And if you know Hugh, he's one of those rare individuals who can do both. So in this exclusive interview, Hugh Darley, creative visionary, designer, business leader, shares how he transformed the cruise and resort industries with the same storytelling principles that made Disney legendary. You're about to learn how he approaches destination development to transform entire islands like an Imagineer. This is Controlled Chaos. We talk about how attractions and destinations are created from first rendering to rope drop and beyond. We're different because our channel is made by people who actually make the magic.
Well, having as a kid always wanting to work for Imagineering and got that opportunity and had a wonderful time at Disney, we've expanded into outside the theme park industry, gotten more into cruise and destination development. And that's proved to be both enjoyable, very profitable, and in a new growth industry. The cruise industry does somewhat a little bit different than what family entertainment does in the theme parks. It really gives you escapism. It allows people to get away and do things they normally don't get a chance to do and go places they normally wouldn't get a chance to go. And what we're finding is people like that intimacy of the experience, the family unit as a group or couples particularly, and even into older adults that are looking for places to go and experience new things. So we've seen a huge growth in the way of marrying entertainment components, even attractions, and the same ideas that we had developing guest experiences at Disney. We've seen that grow into a whole nother industry for destination resorts and the cruise industry, particularly like private islands, which have really enjoyed a very good run.
Right.
After I left Paramount and the Paramount group of companies with Viacom, we started finding that guests in the cruise lines were looking for how do you add value to a destination, and we're doing that through entertainment and guest experiences.
What kind of guest experiences do you typically develop?
Usually we find unique cultural aspects of the islands to play off of, and we just help them tell that story. A lot of the great cultural destinations around the world just didn't have good storytellers. They had great products, but what they needed to understand is what the guests were looking for. So what we try to do is help the local attractions, local countries, and a lot of the tourism boards find a better way to tell their story to typically the American audience, or particularly the cruise line audience, which in many cases are looking something different than maybe a landside stay vacation that you might be having at an all-inclusive resort. Sandals is one of our big clients. We enjoy working with them because they try to encapsulate everything within the culture within the resort hotel. And it's all about delivery. I mean, we learned at Disney, you know, it's telling a story. And as long as you can help them tell a better story, you increase the value and the amount of money the guests are going to leave on the island.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So how do you go about doing that? Where do you start?
Well, we started with an introduction you actually made with us in Royal Caribbean. We were part of a small RFP to do some work in Alaska. And I had never been to Alaska, so I really jumped at the chance. Royal Caribbean hired us to develop a concept which we eventually named Wilderness Alaska. And it was a chance to take a Native American cultural project and create a destination for cruise ships. It was in Hobart Bay, Alaska, and gave us a chance to apply what we learned at Disney and Paramount with intellectual properties. And how do you take a national and really a native story and tell it in such a way that it was a compelling destination for cruise guests? And we've developed one of those ports already in Alaska, and it's proved to be very, very successful.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And then that transitioned into...
well, then we met all the cruise lines. We met all the private islands. We began doing private island development work in about 2005, and have produced those now all over the Caribbean and in Alaska. And recently completed 6 weeks of work in Far East, developing future destinations for Far East tourism with islands and small island nations around Southeast Asia. So what it did was it showed us that we could apply storytelling to a wide variety of destinations, and that's added a lot of value to the tourism product that people are selling.
So how is that different from a theme park specifically?
Well, typically you're looking at an older audience. You're looking at an audience that maybe is reaching for something more than's out of reach locally. You know, in the regional theme park business, through Paramount, we learned a lot about the region and why people are going to those particular parks to get those experiences. The thing with cruise industry and destination travel is people are making a much bigger commitment to spend their time and money, travel a lot further, and usually learn something that they're not familiar with. So the difference that I really saw was people were wanting to explore more, but get out in those destinations. And the theme parks are great for what I call the day-to-day. How do you get the entertainment, the short trips, the family for a weekend concept? Cruise just takes a much bigger look at it from a bigger perspective. And we really enjoyed the destination work because people pick destinations based on the culture, the story, the history, and we try to build on that.
So there's an opportunity then to capture not a half a day or three quarters of a day of somebody's
Absolutely.
life, but you can capture a week.
Absolutely. And what happens is a cruise gives you 7 days typically, 5 locations, 5 stops or destination ports. And then during those days, you have time to explore that local culture. If we can use attractions, which we're beginning to do a lot more of, we tried for 20 years to convince the cruise industry to use attractions, things that we see here on the floor at IAPA. And they were just reluctant. They said, Hugh, we don't want to make it look like Disney World. And I said, what, full and successful? And they've now gone to that. If you go to any of the private islands now, they're full of water attractions and tower attractions. And we've learned how to take those attractions to tell those local stories. So it's worked out well.
How do you do it in a way that doesn't come across as, you know, the way the Europeans sort of turn their nose up at Disneyland Paris?
Well, it's, you know, there's a way to take a device to help you tell your story. It's not about the device. And sometimes that's hard to work with the vendors to understand. It's great to have a balloon, but it's about the story that the balloon can help you tell. We're proposing one for Nassau, for example, and the reason is because you don't get a good perspective of New Providence, the island, but from 300 feet, you can see the entire island from end to end. You see the Atlantis Resort, you see Baha Mar, you get to see the whole outline of the island and where you are. And we found that tower attractions and balloon attractions do something really unique that other things don't do. They let you know where in the world you are. And what's really unique in an island, you don't really have that perspective because on the cruise, you came in at night, you're going to leave later in the afternoon. You don't know where in the world you are. So I always try to do one attraction in a port that tells them where in the world you are so they remember.
That's really interesting.
It is.
So we have been talking and asking questions with respect to ride capacity or attraction capacity. And how do you approach that? I know that's probably, well...
Big challenge. You know, we've learned, and particularly after COVID. COVID pointed out some things to us that we didn't necessarily know was part of that human experience, where people like more privacy, people like intimacy, people like being in smaller groups. You know, we've been in the mass tourism business all of our lives, but all of a sudden you start to look at certain destinations and certain places where people are much more comfortable in a smaller group or traveling really by themselves, the independent traveler. So what we've learned is we don't use capacity really as our governing factor. If the device, the attraction, or the location can give a fantastic experience, we don't care if it's even a couple or a small group. So we work very hard at the touchy-feely part of the emotional side for attractions now. Not to say there's not great mass-attended attractions and parks, but we're seeing the human condition start to move a lot more to that private, one-on-one. I want to drive the boat. You know, at Disney we used to say we designed attractions, put people in boats. Now people want to drive the boat. So the idea is really, how do you find a way to experience that story? We have a really unique attraction that we do called Bed and Boat, where we build a small cabana that floats on a canal, and it has a boat with it. So when you rent it for a day experience, you get your own private cabana on the waterway, and you get your own boat to drive wherever you want to drive. That's a pretty compelling experience when you're in a destination that you can explore on your own and not have to go with a big group.
Especially when people are, you know, in Las Vegas, they're paying for a cabana, but now you have a boat in the Bahamas and it's your own boat.
We call it Bed and Boat.
That is fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about IAAPA this year. What are your impressions, and especially with respect to COVID and the changes that have happened?
Well, what we're sensing is there's a very cautious way of looking at the future. We see a lot of people waiting on somebody to give them some answers. And what we've determined in our business and with our clients, we're really not waiting on that. We're looking at what the human condition has kind of created, which people are a little more cautious and a little more particular about what they're looking for with their entertainment dollar. But we believe that we should get out in front of it and anticipate that there's always going to be these kinds of issues. I think we're in a world now where next year could bring something totally different. So I think one thing we've learned, and we think investors in this industry should learn, stay flexible, but don't be too conservative. Go out front, take some risk, invest in some things, and try to explore developing new attractions and new stories so that people can experience maybe in smaller groups or different groups. But don't be so cautious. I think if we're too cautious, we're going to find we're not delivering what people are looking for. And still, our business is all about delivery. You've got to deliver a great experience, and that's what people are looking for, and that's what they're willing to pay for.
Yeah.
They don't want the day-to-day. They want something different, and that's what we've got to continue as creatives, try to find the different ways to tell those stories and not be so cautious about it, but take some risk.
What, as a creator, just from a basic level, how do you find that story that touches someone's heart or really tugs at their emotions?
It's really dependent upon the destination and where you are. All cultures of the world have different perspectives, and we've learned not to always tell it from an American or a Western perspective, but to find what is the essence of the authentic story, and why did those stories have such a role to play in American history or European history or Caribbean history or even the history of mankind. What are those things that tie all those stories together? And a lot of it is the personal experience. So we always say we do the guest experience, but it's actually more personal than that. You've got to find a way that people relate to it. And we've seen that education in the United States has really changed the expectation of what people relate to. And I think authenticity lost a lot of value. So we try to go back and tell an authentic story so that people can tell the difference between a fantasy and what is real, and hopefully learn something, because we think that the attractions really that are the most successful are those that tell a story in an authentic way, but also deliver so that people can experience that for themselves.
What do you think about IP versus creating a new IP? Purchasing an IP?
Yeah, I think value certainly comes with an intellectual property that people relate to, and certainly a Mickey Mouse icon or a story that's written by a well-known author or creator. But what we find is if you can dig into the authentic, It's much harder. Dig into the authentic and tell a story and have it written correctly and delivered. It's all in the delivery. And we try to work very hard with our clients to make sure they don't tell the story the way Hollywood would tell it, but tell it the way a local would have told it. And so we get a lot back to folklore and telling stories from an authentic perspective. We can certainly make something up, and I mean that's always great to do. But we find that if people in the destination travel business are looking, they want authenticity more than fantasy. So we kind of stick to that storyline.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
What does someone who would maybe want to come work for you, what sort of skills would they have to acquire, and what kind of people do you hire typically?
Well, you know, I say we're old school. I still hand draw. Love the animation, love wireframe design and animated designs that we do in SketchUp. But you still got to be able to draw. I find it very hard now to find students that can still sketch out an idea. And so many times in our industry, most of the inventions on this floor were all sketched literally on a napkin. They were sat down and somebody's eating at a meal and they decide, hey, I'm gonna draw on this napkin. I actually just did one the other day and it reminded me. Talented creatives need to be able to express their ideas in whatever medium they feel used to using. But I still think hand drafting, hand drawing, sketching, telling a story just by sitting down and telling the story. Too many things and too many portfolios I see now are too overproduced. The professors and the people that are guiding these people, their mentors, are too orchestrating. I always tell somebody, if I'm going to interview a creative, I throw a new idea at them right now and say, draw the idea. And it's a challenge for them because they've gotten away from doing that. But that's how we evaluate creative talent. Tell me a story, draw it on a piece of paper and let me see it. Can't use a computer, can't go do research, can't go to the web. You know, tell me the story of so-and-so and let them see if they can tell it to you.
That's good advice.
Yeah.
And speaking of advice, what wisdom can you leave for our listeners?
Well, my mantra is walk good, which is a phrase I learned from Jamaica, the traditional Jamaicans. Chris Blackwell, the founder of Island Records and Bob Marley's manager. We've gotten to be good friends over the years. And he would always say, when I would leave, he'd always say, walk good. So I adapted my piece to that, and I say, walk good, inspire others to dream. And that's really what I've done in my career. I wouldn't suggest to creatives that you look for it for the money or that reward, but it's for the emotional reward. The fact that you can build something, design something, and then watch people enjoy it, that is a tremendous reward. So I tell people, just inspire others. Have people think positive. Try to create new ideas and new concepts. And walk good in your life. Just don't be a bad guy.